Sarah Martinez had dreamed of serving her country since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her older brother leave for the army and promised herself she would follow in his footsteps. But Sarah had bigger dreams than just joining the military. She wanted to be part of something elite, something that would push her beyond every limit she thought she had. At 22, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds soaking wet. Most people looked at her and saw a young woman who belonged behind a desk, not on a battlefield. Her high school guidance counselor had suggested she consider nursing or teaching. Her own mother worried that military life would be too harsh for her youngest daughter. But Sarah had a fire inside her that no one could see from the outside. She had been training since high school, running 10 miles every morning before classes, lifting weights in her family's garage, and studying military tactics in her spare time. When she finally enlisted in the Navy, she had one clear goal in mind: to become part of the most elite fighting force in the world. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL was not open to women when Sarah first enlisted. She served as a Navy intelligence analyst for 3 years, excelling in her duties and earning the respect of her commanding officers. She learned multiple languages, studied enemy tactics, and proved herself invaluable during several overseas deployments. But deep down, she knew this wasn't enough for her. When the military began opening combat roles to women, Sarah was among the first to apply for SEAL training. The news sent shockwaves through her unit. Many of her male colleagues couldn't hide their skepticism. Some laughed openly when they heard she had submitted her application. Others made cruel jokes about how long she would last in the grueling training program. The application process alone was designed to weed out all but the most determined candidates. Sarah had to pass physical fitness tests that pushed her body to its breaking point. She had to undergo psychological evaluations that probed every corner of her mind. She had to prove that she could handle weapons, navigate in hostile territory, and make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. For months, Sarah received no word about her application. She continued her regular duties, while training even harder in her spare time. She swam in the ocean before dawn, practiced combat drills during lunch breaks, and studied military manuals late into the night. Her fellow sailors began to notice her dedication, though many still doubted she would ever make it through SEAL selection. The day Sarah received her acceptance letter, she was sitting in the mess hall eating dinner. Her hands shook as she read the words that would change her life forever. She had been selected for basic underwater demolition, SEAL training, known as BUD-S. She would be part of the first class to include female candidates. Sarah's family had mixed reactions to the news. Her brother was proud but worried about the danger she would face. Her parents were terrified but knew better than to try to talk their determined daughter out of pursuing her dreams. Her friends from home couldn't understand why she would put herself through such torture when she already had a good career in the Navy. The night before she left for training, Sarah sat alone in her barracks room, staring at the acceptance letter. She knew that the next 6 months would be the most challenging of her life. She had read everything she could find about SEAL training, and every account described physical and mental challenges that broke even the strongest men. But Sarah also knew that she had something many of her future classmates might lack: the burning desire to prove that gender meant nothing when it came to courage, determination, and the will to serve. She had spent years preparing for this moment, and she was ready to show the world what she was made of. When Sarah arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, she felt like she was walking into a different universe. The base buzzed with an energy unlike anything she had experienced in regular Navy service. Everywhere she looked, she saw men who looked like they had been carved from stone, with muscles that spoke of years of intense physical training. Sarah was assigned to Class 234, a group of 230 candidates who would begin the infamous Hell Week together. She was one of 3 women in the class, a fact that made her both proud and nervous. The other 2 women were impressive in their own right. Jessica Chen, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and Maria Rodriguez, a Navy explosive ordnance disposal specialist. With nerves of steel, the 3 women quickly bonded over their shared experience of being pioneers in a male-dominated field. They knew that every eye would be on them, waiting for them to fail. The pressure was enormous, But they also knew they had the chance to change history if they could prove themselves worthy of the SEAL Trident. The first weeks of training were designed to establish baseline fitness levels and weed out candidates who weren't mentally prepared for what lay ahead. Even these initial challenges were more intense than anything Sarah had experienced in her regular Navy service. The instructors, all active-duty SEALs with years of combat experience, made it clear that they would show no mercy to anyone who couldn't keep up. Sarah threw herself into every exercise with fierce determination. When the instructors called for 100-yard bear crawls in the sand, she crawled until her arms felt like they would fall off. When they demanded 2-hour ocean swims in frigid water, she swam until her lips turned blue and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. When they ordered the class to carry heavy boats over their heads for miles along the beach, she hefted her share of the weight and kept moving. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that tested Sarah. The instructors used psychological warfare to break down candidates' mental defenses. They screamed insults, questioned the candidate's commitment, and created scenarios designed to push everyone to their breaking point. Sarah endured comments about her size, her gender, and her ability to keep up with the men around her. Some of the male candidates in her class were openly hostile to the idea of women in SEAL training. They made crude jokes, questioned whether the standards were being lowered, and suggested that the women were getting special treatment. Sarah ignored these comments as best she could, focusing instead on proving herself through her actions. As the weeks progressed, the attrition rate climbed steadily higher. Candidates began dropping out for various reasons: injuries, academic failures, or simply the realization that they weren't cut out for this level of commitment. Each time someone rang the bell that signified their decision to quit, the remaining candidates felt the pressure increase. Sarah watched strong, capable men break under the pressure and choose to leave rather than continue the torture. Some of these men were bigger, stronger, and more experienced than she was, yet they couldn't handle what the instructors were putting them through. This gave her confidence that she belonged here, that her mental toughness might be enough to carry her through what her smaller physical frame couldn't handle on its own. The instructors began to take notice of Sarah's persistence. While they continued to push her hard, she detected a subtle shift in their attitude. They began to treat her less like a curiosity and more like a serious candidate. Her boat crew, initially skeptical of having a woman as a teammate, started to respect her work ethic and determination. Sarah's proudest moment in those early weeks came during a particularly brutal beach run. The class was ordered to run 10 miles in soft sand while carrying full combat gear. The pace was punishing, and candidates began falling behind within the first few miles. Sarah's legs felt like lead, and her lungs burned with each breath, but she refused to slow down. Halfway through the run, one of the larger men in her boat crew began to struggle. His face was pale, and he was clearly fighting to stay conscious. Without hesitation, Sarah moved closer to him and began offering encouragement. When he stumbled, she helped steady him. When his pack shifted and threatened to throw him off balance, she helped adjust it while maintaining her own pace. The instructors watched this display of teamwork with interest. They had designed the exercise to test individual endurance. But Sarah had instinctively understood that SEAL teams succeed or fail together. Her willingness to help a struggling teammate, even when she was fighting her own battle against exhaustion, showed the kind of character they were looking for. As Hell Week approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had heard the stories about the most notorious part of SEAL training, when candidates would be pushed to their absolute limits for 5.5 days with minimal sleep and constant physical and mental challenges. Many of the strongest candidates in previous classes had broken during Hell Week. Sarah spent extra time preparing mentally for what lay ahead. She visualized herself succeeding, imagined herself pushing through moments when her body wanted to quit, and reminded herself of all the people who believed she couldn't do it. She thought about her brother, fighting overseas, and drew strength from her desire to join him in defending their country. The night before Hell Week began, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Around her, she could hear other candidates tossing and turning, unable to sleep due to nervousness. Some were quietly praying, others were doing last-minute mental preparation, and a few were probably reconsidering their decision to be there at all. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about the 12-year-old girl who had first dreamed of serving her country in the most elite way possible. That little girl had never imagined the path would be this difficult, But she had also never imagined backing down from a challenge. Tomorrow would be the ultimate test of everything Sarah had trained for, everything she believed about herself, and everything she was willing to sacrifice to achieve her dreams. Hell Week began at midnight on a Sunday with the sound of machine gun fire, explosions, and instructors screaming through bullhorns. Sarah was jolted awake along with the rest of her class, immediately thrust into a world of chaos and confusion. The instructors had transformed their sleeping quarters into a simulated combat zone, complete with smoke, flashing lights, and deafening noise. Within minutes, the entire class was outside in their underwear, being hosed down with freezing water while instructors shouted contradictory orders. Sarah's teeth chattered violently as the ice-cold water hit her skin, but she forced herself to focus on following commands and staying alert. Around her, some candidates were already showing signs of panic and confusion. The first challenge came immediately. A 4-mile run on the beach in wet clothes and boots filled with sand. Sarah's smaller stature actually worked in her favor during this exercise, as she had less body mass to carry and could maintain a faster pace than some of the larger men. She found herself near the front of the group, surprising some of the instructors who had expected her to fall behind early. But Hell Week was designed to be unpredictable, and the instructors quickly shifted to challenges that would test different aspects of each candidate's abilities. They were ordered into the ocean for surf torture, a notorious exercise where candidates had to lie in the freezing Pacific waves, while instructors screamed questions about Navy SEAL history and tactics. The water temperature was 58 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. Sarah lay in the surf with her classmates, feeling the waves crash over her body and wash sand into every crevice of her clothing. Her body began to shake uncontrollably, and she could barely form words to answer the instructor's questions. Several candidates around her began showing signs of serious cold injury. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the class was pulled from the water and immediately ordered to begin a series of grueling calisthenics. Sarah's muscles were so cold and stiff that she could barely move, but she forced herself to keep up with the push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks. The exercise helped warm her body, but it also added to her growing exhaustion. The pattern continued throughout the first day. Freezing water followed by intense physical exercise, brief moments of relative calm interrupted by sudden chaos, and constant psychological pressure from instructors who seemed determined to break every candidate's spirit. Sarah watched as several of her classmates rang the bell and quit, unable to handle the relentless pace. By the second day, Sarah was running on pure willpower. She had managed perhaps 2 hours of sleep, grabbing short naps whenever the instructors allowed brief rest periods. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, and every piece of clothing she owned was soaked with a mixture of seawater, sweat, and sand. Yet, she continued to push forward, drawing strength from her determination not to be the first woman to quit. The boat races on Tuesday tested the candidates' ability to work as a team under extreme stress. Sarah's boat crew, initially skeptical of her abilities, had grown to respect her determination and reliability. When their boat instructor ordered them to carry their heavy inflatable boat over their heads for miles along the beach, Sarah took her position and refused to let her team down. Despite being the smallest member of her boat crew, Sarah carried her share of the weight. When one of her teammates began to falter under the load, she encouraged him to keep going. When another teammate's legs gave out during a particularly brutal sandhill climb, she helped support him while maintaining her grip on the boat. Her boat crew began to see her not as a liability, but as one of their strongest links. Wednesday brought the dreaded log PT, where boat crews had to perform coordinated exercises while carrying telephone poles weighing over 200 pounds. Sarah's boat crew had to work together to lift, press, and carry their log through a series of increasingly difficult challenges. The exercise was designed to test both physical strength and team coordination under extreme fatigue. Sarah struggled with some of the pure strength requirements, but her boat crew had learned to work around this limitation. They positioned her where she could contribute most effectively, using her endurance and determination to help the team succeed. When other boat crews were falling apart due to internal conflicts and exhaustion, Sarah's crew remained cohesive and focused. The instructors began to take notice of Sarah's leadership qualities. While she wasn't the loudest or most physically imposing candidate, She had a way of keeping her teammates focused and motivated during their darkest moments. When morale was lowest, she found ways to inject humor and optimism. When team members wanted to give up, she reminded them of their shared goals and commitment. Thursday morning brought one of the most challenging evolutions of Hell Week: a round-the-world paddle. The boat crews had to paddle their inflatable boats through rough ocean swells to a series of buoys positioned miles offshore. The water was choppy, the boats were heavy, and many candidates were hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Sarah's boat crew launched into the churning surf, immediately struggling to maintain coordination in the difficult conditions. Waves crashed over their boat, filling it with freezing water that they had to bail out while continuing to paddle. Several times, they nearly capsized as larger swells lifted them high into the air before dropping them back down. During this evolution, Sarah experienced her lowest moment of Hell Week. Exhaustion, cold, and sleep deprivation combined to make her question everything she was doing. Her arms felt like they were made of lead. Her hands were so cold she could barely grip the paddle, and her mind began to wander to thoughts of warm beds and hot meals. For several minutes, Sarah seriously considered quitting. She thought about how easy it would be to simply stop paddling and let the instructors know she was done. No one would blame her for trying. She had already proven more than most people thought possible. She could return to her intelligence career with honor and leave this misery behind. But as these thoughts ran through her mind, Sarah looked around at her boat crew teammates. They were all suffering just as much as she was. Yet they continued to paddle with grim determination. She realized that quitting wouldn't just affect her. It would let down the men who had come to depend on her strength and reliability. Sarah forced herself to focus on her paddle strokes, finding a rhythm that she could maintain despite her exhaustion. She began counting strokes, setting small goals for herself. 100 strokes, then 200, then 500. Each small victory built on the last, helping her push through the darkest moments of the evolution. When her boat crew finally reached the final buoy and began the return journey to shore, Sarah felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. She had faced her moment of greatest weakness and chosen to continue fighting. The return paddle seemed easier, not because the physical challenges had diminished, but because she had proven to herself that she could overcome anything her mind told her was impossible. Friday brought the final day of Hell Week. Though the candidates had no way of knowing when it would end, Sarah had been awake for most of 5 days, surviving on brief catnaps and pure determination. Her body moved through the exercises on autopilot. Her mind focused solely on taking the next step, completing the next task, and refusing to quit. The final evolution was a nighttime beach run that seemed to go on forever. Sarah's legs felt like rubber, and she could barely see straight due to exhaustion, but she continued to put one foot in front of the other, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Around her, the remaining candidates moved like zombies. All of them pushed far beyond normal human limits. When the instructors finally called an end to Hell Week, Sarah could barely comprehend that it was over. She had expected some dramatic moment of celebration, but instead felt only numbness and disbelief. Of the 230 candidates who had started the week, only 97 remained. Sarah was not only still standing, she had never seriously considered quitting after that moment in the boat. The 3 women who had started Hell Week together had all survived, making history as the first female candidates to complete this notorious milestone. The instructors, while maintaining their stern exterior, showed subtle signs of respect for what the remaining candidates had accomplished. They had been pushed beyond every conceivable limit and had chosen to continue fighting. As Sarah stumbled to her barracks for her first real sleep in 5 days, she felt a profound sense of transformation. The young woman who had entered Hell Week was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and absolutely certain that she belonged among the elite warriors she was training to become. She had faced her deepest fears and darkest moments, and had emerged victorious. The remaining months of BUD/S training would bring new challenges: diving phase, land warfare phase, and countless opportunities to fail or succeed. But Sarah now knew with absolute certainty that she had what it took to become a Navy SEAL. Hell Week had stripped away every doubt, every insecurity, and every question about her belonging in this elite community. More importantly, Sarah had earned the respect of her fellow candidates and instructors through her actions rather than her words. The men who had initially doubted her abilities now saw her as a valued teammate and fellow warrior. She had proven that courage, determination, and teamwork mattered more than gender or physical size when it came to achieving seemingly impossible goals. 18 months after completing Bud's training, Sarah Martinez stood in a briefing room in Afghanistan. Surrounded by some of the most elite warriors in the world, she had successfully completed all phases of SEAL training, earned her trident, and was now part of SEAL Team 6, the most secretive and skilled special operations unit in the military. The journey from that first day of Hell Week to this moment had been filled with countless challenges, but none as significant as what she was about to face. The mission briefing was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist target was hiding in a fortified compound deep in Taliban-controlled territory. The target had been responsible for planning attacks that killed dozens of American soldiers, and capturing him alive was crucial for gathering intelligence about future planned attacks. Sarah's team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, was a 20-year veteran with 4 combat deployments under his belt. He had initially been skeptical about having a woman on his team, but Sarah's performance during training and preparation exercises had won his respect. Still, this would be her first real combat mission, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The compound was located in a narrow valley surrounded by mountainous terrain that made helicopter insertion risky. The team would have to parachute in under cover of darkness, trek several miles through hostile territory, assault the compound, capture the target, and extract to a pickup point while potentially fighting their way through enemy forces. As Morrison outlined the mission details, Sarah felt her heart rate increase. She had trained for scenarios exactly like this hundreds of times, but the knowledge that real lives hung in the balance added a weight to the situation that no simulation could replicate. She studied the aerial photos of the compound, memorizing every building, every potential entry point, and every possible escape route. The team consisted of 8 SEALs, each with specialized skills crucial to the mission's success. Sarah's role was to handle communications and provide sniper overwatch once the compound was secured. Her smaller size and expert marksmanship made her ideal for positioning in tight spaces where she could cover her teammates' movements while maintaining radio contact with command. 2 days before the mission, the team conducted final rehearsals using a mock-up of the target compound built at their forward operating base. They practiced the assault dozens of times, working out timing, coordination, and contingency plans for everything that could go wrong. Sarah performed flawlessly during these exercises, but she could sense that some team members still harbored doubts about how she would perform under real combat stress. The night before the mission, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the skeptics who had said women didn't belong in combat roles, the instructors who had pushed her beyond her limits, and the teammates who had gradually come to trust and depend on her. Tomorrow would be the ultimate test of everything she had worked for. The insertion went smoothly, despite treacherous weather conditions. Sarah and her team parachuted through low clouds and high winds, landing within meters of their planned drop zone. They quickly gathered their equipment, conducted radio checks, and began the long trek through mountainous terrain toward the target compound. Sarah carried 60 pounds of gear through rocky terrain in complete darkness, using night vision goggles to navigate treacherous paths that dropped hundreds of feet into ravines. The team moved in single file, maintaining complete silence as they covered the miles between their landing zone and the objective. Sarah's endurance training proved invaluable as she kept pace with her larger, stronger teammates over the difficult terrain. 3 hours before dawn, the team reached the high ground overlooking the target compound. Through their scopes and binoculars, they could see guards patrolling the perimeter and lights in several buildings. Intelligence reports suggested that between 12 and 20 enemy fighters were present, armed with assault rifles and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. Morrison positioned his team members at key locations around the compound, while Sarah climbed to a rocky outcrop that provided an elevated view of the entire target area. From her position, she could see all the buildings, cover the main courtyard, and maintain radio contact with both her team and the command center back at base. As dawn approached, the team prepared to execute the assault. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch and communications support, calling out enemy positions and threats that her teammates couldn't see from ground level. She had trained for this role countless times, but the reality of having live enemies in her scope sights was something no amount of training could fully prepare her for. The assault began with coordinated explosions that breached the compound walls simultaneously. Sarah watched through her scope as her teammates flowed into the courtyard like water, moving with the precision and coordination that had been drilled into them through months of training. Enemy fighters immediately began responding to the attack, firing from windows and rooftops. Sarah's training took over as she began calling out targets and threats over the radio. Her calm, clear voice guided her teammates through the chaos of the firefight, warning them of enemies they couldn't see, and confirming when threats had been neutralized. Her marksmanship skills proved crucial as she eliminated several enemy fighters who were attempting to flank her team's positions. 20 minutes into the assault, disaster struck. As Morrison's fire team moved toward the main building where the target was believed to be hiding, they were caught in a crossfire from multiple enemy positions. One of Sarah's teammates, Petty Officer Rodriguez, was hit by enemy fire and went down in the open courtyard where he was exposed to continued shooting. Without hesitation, Morrison broke cover to reach his wounded teammate, but immediately came under heavy fire from multiple directions. Sarah could see through her scope that he was pinned down and unable to move Rodriguez to safety. Enemy fighters were maneuvering to surround both men, and the situation was rapidly becoming desperate. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define her career and potentially save her teammates' lives. Abandoning her overwatch position, she grabbed her medical kit and sprinted down the rocky slope toward the compound. Her teammates' voices crackled through her radio, ordering her to stay in position, but she ignored their commands as she focused on reaching the wounded Rodriguez. The courtyard was a killing field, with bullets flying from multiple directions as Sarah sprinted across open ground. Her small size and speed worked in her favor as she zigzagged toward Rodriguez's position, but she was still exposed to deadly crossfire from enemy fighters who had spotted her movement. Halfway across the courtyard, Sarah stumbled on loose rocks and fell hard, skidding across the ground and temporarily losing her weapon. Enemy fighters immediately focused their fire on her position, sending bullets cracking through the air inches from her head. For a moment, she lay stunned on the ground, certain that she was about to be killed. But Sarah's training and determination kicked in, and she rolled behind a low wall that provided minimal cover. From this position, she could see Rodriguez bleeding heavily just 20 meters away, with Morrison pinned down nearby and unable to help. The rest of the team was engaged in firefights throughout the compound and couldn't provide immediate assistance. Sarah realized that she was Rodriguez's only chance for survival. Taking a deep breath, she burst from behind the wall and continued her sprint across the courtyard. Enemy bullets kicked up dust and fragments around her feet as she ran, but somehow she reached Rodriguez's position without being hit. Rodriguez was unconscious and bleeding from a chest wound that was potentially fatal if not treated immediately. Sarah quickly assessed his injuries while bullets continued to crack overhead, then began applying pressure to the wound while trying to establish an airway. Her medical training from SEAL school proved invaluable as she worked to stabilize him under the worst possible conditions. Morrison, still pinned down nearby, watched in amazement as Sarah worked on Rodriguez while completely exposed to enemy fire. Her calm professionalism under extreme stress was unlike anything he had seen in his 20 years of military service. She seemed completely focused on her patient, apparently oblivious to the bullets flying around her position. While treating Rodriguez, Sarah spotted the enemy fighters who were preventing the team's advance toward the main building. From her position on the ground, she had a clear shot at 3 fighters positioned behind a low wall. Without hesitating, she grabbed her rifle and eliminated all 3 targets with precise shots, opening a path for her teammates to continue the assault. Morrison was finally able to move to Sarah's position, where he helped her carry Rodriguez to cover behind a concrete barrier. Other team members, freed from the crossfire that had pinned them down, quickly advanced through the compound and captured the target without further casualties. As dust settled over the compound and the immediate threat was neutralized, Morrison looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and disbelief. The young woman who had been knocked to the ground in the middle of a firefight had not only survived, but had saved Rodriguez's life and eliminated key enemy positions that allowed the mission to succeed. Rodriguez was evacuated by helicopter and made a full recovery thanks to Sarah's quick medical intervention. The captured target provided intelligence that prevented several planned attacks on American forces. The mission was deemed a complete success, with Sarah's actions being specifically cited in the after-action reports. Word of Sarah's heroism quickly spread through the special operations community. The image of a small woman sprinting across a bullet-swept courtyard to save a wounded teammate became legendary among Navy SEALs. Her teammates, who had initially questioned whether women belonged in combat roles, now spoke of her with the same respect reserved for the most decorated war heroes. Sarah's commanding officers recognized her actions with official commendations, but the respect of her fellow SEALs meant more to her than any medal. She had proven beyond any doubt that courage and commitment mattered more than gender or physical size when it came to serving at the highest levels of military service. The mission also marked a turning point in attitudes toward women in special operations roles. Sarah's performance under fire demonstrated that female warriors could not only meet the demanding standards of elite units, but could excel in ways that surprised even experienced military leaders. Years later, Sarah would look back on that day in Afghanistan as the moment when she truly became a Navy SEAL. All the training, all the doubt, and all the pressure had led to those crucial minutes when her teammates' lives depended on her actions. She had been knocked down, but she had gotten back up and shocked everyone with her response. The little girl from Texas who had dreamed of serving her country had grown into a warrior whose courage under fire would inspire a new generation of women to pursue their own dreams of military service. Sarah had proven that the greatest strength comes not from physical size or gender, but from the determination to never give up when others are counting on you.